Before we start, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and click like to support the channel. Now, get ready to discover what should never be found. Underscore 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 underscore. I've always been passionate about exploration. The idea of getting lost in dense forests or deep caves has always fascinated me. But nothing would prepare me for what I found on that expedition. When I received the proposal, it seemed like an opportunity one couldn't refuse. To explore a newly discovered cave in a remote area, far from any civilization. The promise was simple. Document the internal structure and report any geological anomaly. Easy, right? Little did I know that this journey would lead me to something that should never be unearthed. The place was miles from any city. The path was narrow, flanked by gnarled trees that seemed to whisper in the wind. Once there, the entrance to the cave was narrow, almost hidden by vegetation. One detail bothered me. There were strange symbols engraved on the stones around the entrance. They looked old, worn out by time, but they conveyed something. A warning, perhaps? Ignored. After all, ancient symbols are common in unexplored places. As I turned on my flashlight and took my first steps, I felt the air change. Humidity, smell of wet earth, but there was something more, a subtle sense that I wasn't alone. But it was just the echo of my footsteps, right? The path deepened into curves and narrow tunnels. The light from the entrance quickly faded, replaced by a dense and oppressive darkness. The further I went, the more I noticed small marks on the walls. Scratches? No, they were drawings. Representations of humanoid figures, distorted, always accompanied by symbols that I did not recognize. It was then that I noticed something strange. My tracking equipment started to fail. The compass rotated uncontrollably, and the GPS signal simply disappeared. Logic told me to go back, but curiosity pushed me forward. I needed to understand what was there, and that's when I saw it, a narrow passage that was not on the map provided. It seemed recently opened, perhaps due to collapse. Against common sense, I decided to go in. Now looking back, I know it was the biggest mistake of my life. But what about you? Would you have the courage to follow a path that clearly shouldn't be there? Comment below as we continue this journey. The passage I discovered was cramped, requiring me to squeeze through sharp rocks and damp walls. The air grew heavier with each step, as if the cave itself was trying to repel me. The light from the lantern flickered, casting shadows that danced on the stone walls. Soon I came to a large hall, where the ceiling seemed to disappear into the darkness. The walls were covered with moss and dry roots that came down like skeletal fingers. But what really caught my attention were the marks scattered on the floor. Human footprints, but disproportionate. They were too big for anyone, and they were fresh. The silence was overwhelming. Not even the sound of water droplets echoed there. I started to hear something, a low, continuous sound, like a whisper coming from all sides. I spun quickly, but there was nothing. The feeling of being watched intensified. That was when I saw, in the distance, a figure. It was partially hidden behind a rock formation. Property. Watching. My flashlight failed for a second, and when it came back, the figure was gone. My instinct screamed to run, but something inside me needed to know what it was. I slowly approached, taking a deep breath to maintain control. Behind the rock, there was nothing, just a deep hole, a dark pit that seemed to have no end. And then, an icy breeze rose from the bottom, bringing with it a smell of rot. It was not possible for there to be wind there. Something was wrong, very wrong. I kept moving forward with slow steps. Absolute silence surrounded me like a suffocating cloak. No sound of insects, no dripping water, just the irregular sound of my breathing. It was as if the cave itself absorbed the sound. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I realized that small cracks revealed something strange. Symbols hidden under layers of rock. Some were scratched, as if someone had tried to erase them. Others looked recent, fresh features as if someone or something still be there. Suddenly, the flashlight flashed. For a second, the darkness swallowed me. When the light came back, I was sure to see something moving further ahead. Not an animal. Seemed human. But it disappeared too quickly for me to be sure. I began to hear a faint breathing sound, but it wasn't mine. As he progressed, the marks on the walls became more frequent and more disturbing. Distorted figures with empty eyes and open mouths in silent screams filled the walls. Some appeared to have been engraved with rudimentary fingernails or tools. Others, more recent, shone faintly under the light of the flashlight, as if they were impregnated with something organic. Soon I realized that it was not just drawings. Some marks formed patterns, almost like a map or a ritual. There were circular symbols surrounded by kneeling figures, all facing the center. In the center, something was engraved in high relief, a creature with torn wings and pupilless eyes. Among these drawings, phrases in an unknown language were scattered, but one of them seemed recent and was engraved in crooked letters. Do not awaken him who sleeps. Suddenly, I heard a crack. I turned the flashlight quickly and saw something fleeting hide in the darkness. The temperature dropped sharply, and my breath formed clouds in the air. The sound of scratches began to echo around me, as if something was moving on the walls. A shiver ran down my spine. I began to wonder who else could have been there, and if it would still be. Continuing through the tunnels, I noticed narrow cracks in the walls, forming passages that seemed impossible to be natural. Some were so narrow that it would be impossible for anyone to get through, but others, they seemed inviting, as if they were waiting for me. In one of these passages, the rock appeared to be worn by human hands, fingerprints, as if someone had been dragged. On the ground, trails of something dark and sticky stretched inward. The silence there was different, heavy, as if absorbing every sound. As I illuminated one of these passages, I saw a stone door partially opened, with inscriptions like the ones I had seen before. It seemed like an invitation or a warning. That partially open stone door seemed to call me, as if something beyond it was eagerly awaiting my approach. The cold started there. First, a soft, icy breeze escaped from the crevasse, chilling my skin. But as I went along, the air became thicker and colder, as if I were descending into something alive and ancient. My hands were shaking slightly. I didn't know if it was from the biting cold or the tension that was building up in my chest. The metallic smell of blood mixed with damp earth intensified with each step. I looked back at the darkness that had engulfed me and realized that going back was no longer an option. He was trapped there. It was then that I heard it, a shuffling, deep sound coming from within those hidden passages. It was not the echo of my footsteps. It was something big, and he moved slowly, as if he felt my presence. Each noise reverberated on the walls, making it impossible to identify its origin. The lantern failed for a brief moment, and in that instant, I swear I saw something move through the shadows. The light flickered back, and I stood still, holding my breath. The cold was pressing, and a fine fog began to form at ground level, crawling like serpents along the path. It was then that I saw a figure in the background, tall, misshapen. He was there, motionless, watching me. Its contours made no sense, as if the shadow itself were alive, writhing slowly. When I blinked, it was no longer there. A soft whisper crept to my ears. Incomprehensible words, but loaded with a silent threat. It wasn't just a sound, it was a warning. My feet felt like they were glued to the ground. Every fiber of my body screamed to flee, but my mind was mesmerized by the darkness in front of me. I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs, and took another step forward, feeling that presence accompanied me. With each step, the narrow corridor slowly widened until it opened into a vast and silent chamber. My hands clenched tighter on the lantern as the flickering light revealed what was there, an altar. But it wasn't like the altars we see in ancient churches or temples. This was made of black stone, covered with symbols that seemed to pulsate with an energy of their own. The altar was surrounded by bones, small and large, of animals and something else. The walls around it were engraved with the same distorted inscriptions I had seen before, but now they looked sharper, more recent, as if they had been renewed. At the top of the altar, there was an object wrapped in red cloths, darkened by time. Something told me not to play, but curiosity spoke louder. I approached slowly, feeling the air get heavier. When I reached out, an icy wind blew violently, extinguishing the flame of the lantern for an instant. In total darkness, I heard the whisper again, higher, closer. When the light returned, the cloth had unraveled, revealing a strange stone carving. It was the representation of a creature that defied any human logic. Torn wings, empty eyes, and open mouths in silent screams. Suddenly, a deep, deep sound reverberated through the chamber, like a heartbeat. The earth beneath my feet shook slightly. It was not a simple altar. It was a stamp, a fragile boundary between our world and something that should never have been awakened. The bass sound still echoed through the chamber, vibrating on the floor and walls, as if something slowly awakened. Without realizing it, I took steps back, but the cold intensified with each movement, as if the cave itself was breathing. The shadows began to stretch on the walls, distorting into impossible shapes. The lantern flickered again, and for an instant, the light revealed silhouettes writhing around the altar. They were not reflections. The shadows were moving by themselves. They ran down the walls, dragging along the floor, closer and closer to me. Between the shadows, eyes appeared and disappeared, staring at me with a silent fury. Whispers filled the air, now clearer, as if ancient voices whispered forbidden words. I tried to move away, but I felt something cold touch my shoulder. I turned sharply, but there was nothing I could see. The altar beat like a heart, and the shadows began to rise, taking shape. Humanoid figures, faceless, but with an overwhelming presence. They advanced slowly, not in a hurry, but with the certainty that I would have nowhere to run. I needed to get out of there, but the only way out was the same one I entered, and she now seemed much more distant. My heart beat wildly as the shadows approached, taking shape before me. Every step I took back seemed to be swallowed up by the darkness itself. The faceless humanoid figures moved forward slowly, as if they knew I was cornered. The biting cold now felt alive, enveloping my body and peeking into my sanity. I turned toward the passage I entered, but something was wrong. The path was no longer there. The walls seemed to have closed, as if the cave itself was changing around me. The shadows laughed, not with sound, but with the suffocating feeling that my fate was already sealed. Desperate, I began to run in any direction other than towards those entities. My feet slipped on the damp ground, and the flashlight fluttered wildly. With each curve, the walls became narrower, more suffocating, as if they were leading me somewhere. It was then that I realized I wasn't running away. I was being guided. Each narrow corridor took me deeper, until I came across an opening that seemed to pulsate, as if breathing. With no choice, I entered. Inside, I found a vast circular chamber. The walls were covered with symbols that glowed faintly in a reddish hue, like open scars. In the center, a crack in the ground seemed to extend into the core of the earth. From it, a thick, black smoke rose slowly. Suddenly, the cave shook. A muffled roar echoed from the depths of that crevice. The shadows that chased me began to gather around the opening, as if they were waiting for something or someone. I realized then that there was no turning back. The path was closed, and whatever was asleep down there now knew I was there. I had crossed the line. It was no longer a matter of escape. It was a matter of survival. The muffled roar ceased, replaced by an absolute and oppressive silence. The shadows stopped, motionless, as if waiting for a silent order. The crack in the center of the chamber seemed to pulsate, exhaling that thick, black smoke that now spread across the floor, creeping towards me. Then something moved in the depths. First, a slight tremor, almost imperceptible, but soon the entire ground vibrated, as if the earth itself breathed. A guttural, lingering sound echoed from the depths. It wasn't a human sound. It was primitive, ancestral, something that should never be heard. The smoke began to condense, forming black tentacles that slowly extended across the room. Among them, shapeless shapes began to emerge, as if darkness took shape. A pair of glowing eyes opened in the void of the slit, staring directly at me. They were no ordinary eyes. They were deep, infinite, and at the same time empty. Looking at them was like staring into the abyss. My body froze. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. Those shadows, now part of the entity itself, began to move towards me, not in a hurry, but with the calm of someone who already knows the result. A whisper invaded my mind. It was not heard, but felt. Old, incomprehensible words that seemed to eat away at my thoughts. I felt a sharp pain in my head, as if something was trying to get in. With one last flash of sanity, I forced my body to move. I spun around, desperately looking for a way out. That's when I noticed a discreet crack in the wall of the chamber, partially hidden by roots and stones. Without thinking, I ran toward the crack, feeling the shadows stretch behind me. The cave shook violently, and the roar echoed again, now louder, closer. That was waking up. I needed to leave. Now. I threw myself through the crack in the wall without looking back. The rough stones tore through my skin as I peeked through the tight space. Behind me, the roar of the entity echoed louder and louder, making the entire cave vibrate. Black smoke began to seep through the crack, crawling like fingers trying to reach me. The tunnel was narrow and uneven, forcing me to crawl with difficulty. Each breath was an effort, the air thin and impregnated by the metallic smell of smoke. My heart pounded in my chest, and the feeling of something approaching only increased. It wasn't just the entity, there was more. As I emerged from the crack, I came across another corridor, dark and unknown. The sound of something dragging along the floor echoed close behind. I quickly looked back and saw tendrils of shadow sliding across the walls, distorting the surrounding space. They were following me. Ran. My legs burned with fatigue, but fear drove me. The narrow passages seemed endless, and the feeling of being guided by something grew. The walls were covered with symbols that pulsed weakly, as if the cave were alive, watching me. In a moment of desperation, I entered a narrower side tunnel, hoping to throw them off. But to my horror, I came face to face with a wall of human bones, stacked in a grotesque fashion. Recent bones. I wasn't the first to try to escape. I heard a crack behind me. Slowly, I turned and saw a figure coming out of the shadows. It was not the colossal entity, but something smaller, more agile. His empty eyes shone in the darkness. One of the servants of that thing. I ran. I ran without thinking, without looking back. Each turn seemed to take me deeper, further away from any chance of exit. But stopping wasn't an option. My lungs burned, and each step felt heavier. The cave seemed to stretch out endlessly, as if it was swallowing me. But then, finally, I saw something different ahead. A faint beam of light filtered through cracks in the stones. A way out. Without thinking, I ran towards the light, dodging rocks and roots that seemed to want to trap me. The air became less dense. The smell of blood and rust began to dissipate. Hope was reborn within me. I was close. I came to a narrow opening that led to a clearing. The moonlight illuminated the place, and for the first time in hours, I took a deep breath without the weight of darkness suffocating me. My eyes slowly adapted to the light, and I fell to my knees exhausted. But something was wrong. The silence was absolute. No sound of wind, of leaves, of animals. Just an oppressive emptiness. I looked around and realized that the trees around me were twisted, as if burned inside. Its shadows stretched out in an unnatural way, forming strange patterns on the ground. Then I realized the same inscriptions that covered the walls of the cave were engraved on the trees. Ancient symbols, now shining faintly in the moonlight. I hadn't escaped. Or worse, there might never be a way out. Behind me, I heard the same whisper that echoed inside the cave. But now it came from all sides. No matter how much I ran, the darkness was with me. I ran until I couldn't feel my legs anymore. The surrounding forest seemed to rotate, The gnarled trees formed shadows that elongated and moved by themselves. Behind me, the sound of whispers never ceased. It was as if the cave itself had followed me. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself that I was safe, but the whispers continued. At night, they became clearer, closer. Old, incomprehensible words echoed in the darkness of my room. I began to find symbols scratched on the walls, identical to those in the cave. But I live alone. My reflections in the mirror seem to move a second after me. The shadows in the corners of the rooms appear denser, darker. And there are times when I feel something touch my shoulder, but when I turn around, there's nothing. I didn't leave alone. That entity, that which slept, now walks with me. Maybe not physically, but within my mind, or maybe within the world around me. More and more, I feel like I'm becoming a part of it. Or worse, she is becoming a part of me. Maybe I've released something that should never have been agreed upon. If this story has hooked you this far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And remember, some doors once opened can never be closed again.